The Grand Tribunal Hall was more crowded than it had ever been in its 10,000-year history, with representatives from every known species packed into the massive chamber, all of them waiting to see how the human challenge would end. Emperor Jolvarek sat on his throne of solidified starlight, his crystal body glowing with confident colors of purple and orange, and he had prepared a speech about human foolishness that he was eager to deliver. "Where is the human?" someone in the crowd asked. "The message said he would be here an hour ago. Perhaps he has finally realized the truth," the emperor announced loudly. "Perhaps he has decided that running away is better than admitting defeat in person." Laughter rippled through the chamber, but it died quickly when the massive doors at the entrance began to open with a sound of grinding metal that echoed through the hall. Marcus Cole walked through those doors with his head held high and his back straight. And behind him came Elena and Tomas and their AI companion Homer, all of them dressed in simple human clothing without any weapons or armor. The emperor leaned forward on his throne, waiting to see the fear and shame on the human's face, waiting to deliver his crushing words of victory. But Marcus was smiling. That same strange smile he had worn a year ago when he accepted the challenge. And the emperor felt a flicker of uncertainty in his crystal heart. "You have returned," Jolvarak said, his voice filling the chamber. "I assume you have come to formally surrender your claim to Arithia 7 and admit that humans are not capable of taming the Kithran." "No," Marcus replied calmly. "I have come to show you what humanity is capable of." He turned back toward the entrance and raised his hand in a gesture of welcome. And for a moment, nothing happened, and the emperor began to laugh. Then the walls shook, and a sound like thunder rolled through the chamber, and something massive began to push through the doors that suddenly seemed far too small. The matriarch entered the Grand Tribunal Hall, 30 meters of armored fury and ancient power, and she had to bend her great body to fit through the entrance that had been designed for beings much smaller than herself. Chaos erupted instantly. Aliens screamed and ran in every direction. Guards raised their weapons and shouted orders. And Emperor Jolvarak rose from his throne with colors of pure red alarm flashing through his crystal form. "Kill it," someone shouted. "Destroy the beast before it destroys us all." But before any weapon could fire, the matriarch did something that stopped every being in the chamber and turned their terror into shocked confusion. She walked to Marcus Cole, lowered her massive head, and pressed her snout against his outstretched hand with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a creature of her size and power. The hall fell silent, absolutely silent, as hundreds of aliens witnessed something that should not be possible. The untamable monster, the beast that had killed thousands, standing peacefully beside a single human while he stroked her scales like she was a loyal pet. "She is not a pet," Marcus said loudly, as if reading their thoughts. "She is not conquered or broken or controlled. She is here because she chose to come, because I asked her, and she said yes." He looked directly at the emperor, who had not moved since the matriarch entered, whose crystal body now flickered with colors that his advisors had never seen before. Colors that spoke of fear and disbelief and something that might have been shame. "You challenged me to tame the beast," Marcus continued, "and I have done so, but not in the way you expected. Not in the way anyone expected." He walked forward, the matriarch moving beside him like a shadow made of darkness and fire, and the crowd parted before them like water before the bow of a ship. "Your empire tried for centuries to conquer Arithia 7, Marcus said. "You sent armies and weapons and technology beyond anything humanity possesses. And you failed because you did not understand what you were fighting." The emperor found his voice. "Though it was weaker than before, we were fighting a monster, a creature of destruction that could not be reasoned with." "No," Marcus replied firmly. "You were fighting a mother who was protecting her home and her children from invaders who wanted to take everything from her. And every army you sent, every weapon you used, only proved to her that you were exactly the threat she feared. He stopped in front of the throne and looked up at the being who had mocked humanity a year ago, who had given them this impossible task believing it would prove their worthlessness. Humans are not the strongest species in the galaxy, Marcus admitted. We do not have the best weapons or the longest history or the most advanced technology. But we have something else, something that your 10,000-year-old empire never learned. And what is that? Jolveric asked, his voice barely a whisper empathy. Marcus said, the ability to look at another creature, even a creature that seems like a monster, and try to understand what it needs instead of what we can take from it. He placed his hand on the matriarch's head, and she made that rumbling sound of contentment that Elena had learned to recognize. And across the galaxy, billions of viewers watched a human scratch behind the ear of the deadliest creature known to exist. Arithia 7 is ours, Marcus announced. As you agreed, as the Galactic Territorial Council witnessed, and we will colonize it, but not by driving the Kithran away or destroying her kind. Then how? Someone in the crowd called out, as partners, Marcus answered. The matriarch's eggs will hatch soon, and we will be there to help raise her children. And they will grow up alongside human children. And together we will build something that has never existed before. A true partnership between species. The Emperor stared at Marcus for a long moment, and then his gaze moved to the matriarch, who looked back at him with those 6 red eyes that had haunted Vessery nightmares for centuries. You called us an infant species, Marcus said. And maybe we are, but infants grow, and we have been growing alongside the dangerous creatures of Earth for 300,000 years. He smiled again. That same mysterious smile, and now everyone in the chamber finally understood what it meant. You wanted to know what makes humans special? Marcus asked. This is it. This is what we do. We do not conquer nature, we join it. We make allies out of enemies. We turn predators into partners. And we have been doing it since before we could write or build cities or dream of traveling to the stars. The matriarch spread her wings. 30 meters of apex predator, displaying her full, terrible glory. And yet, she did not attack, did not threaten, just stood beside the tiny human who had offered her something no one else in the galaxy ever had. We make friends, Marcus said simply. The Emperor looked at the human and the beast standing together, and he saw in that moment a glimpse of a future that he had never imagined. A future where strength was measured not by the ability to destroy, but by the ability to connect. Where the youngest species in the galaxy might just teach the oldest ones something new. Arithia 7 is yours, Jolveric said finally, his voice heavy with an emotion that might have been defeat or might have been something else. As I promised, Marcus bowed his head slightly in acknowledgement, then turned and walked toward the exit with the matriarch at his side. And the crowd parted before them in silence. At the doorway he paused and looked back at the assembled aliens, at the Emperor on his throne, at the drones that were broadcasting this moment across the galaxy. The Vexery have ruled through fear for 10,000 years, he said. Humanity offers a different way, and any species that wants to learn it. Any species that is tired of fighting alone against a hostile universe, you know where to find us? Then he was gone, walking out into the vastness of space with a monster who had become a friend. And behind him, the galaxy began to change in ways that no one could have predicted in the years that followed. Arithia 7 became the most successful human colony ever established. And the matriarch's children grew strong and healthy alongside human. Children who learned to ride on their backs and speak their psychic language. Other species began to reach out to humanity. Species that had been defeated or marginalized or ignored by the great empires. And they asked to learn the secret that Marcus had demonstrated. There was no secret. Only the simple truth that humans had discovered long ago on a small blue planet circling an ordinary star, the Universe was vast and dangerous, and full of creatures that could kill you. But it was also full of potential friends. And the greatest power any species could have was the power to reach out to something different and say the words that changed everything. I am not here to hurt you. I am here to help. The Vexery Empire had ruled for 10,000 years, but its time was ending. Not through war or conquest, but through something far more powerful and across the galaxy. In places where fear had ruled for centuries, creatures that had been called monsters began to look at the stars and wonder if perhaps there was another way to live. Humanity's true reign was just beginning. 8 months had passed since Marcus and his team arrived on Arithia 7, and the relationship between the humans and the Kithrin had grown into something that no alien watching could understand or explain. The Kithrin, whom Elena had started calling the matriarch after decoding part of her psychic language, no longer attacked when Marcus entered her territory, and sometimes she would appear and simply stand nearby, watching him with those 6 glowing eyes as he sat peacefully in the volcanic basin. But they were still not truly connected, still not partners in the way Marcus needed them to be if he was going to fulfill the challenge. And time was running out. We need a breakthrough, Marcus told his team one evening. Something that will show her we are truly different from every other species that has come here. What more can we do? Thomas asked. You have spent months proving we are not a threat. But proving we are not enemies is not the same as proving we are friends. Elena looked up from her equipment with excitement on her face. I have finished translating the basic patterns of her psychic communication, and I think I know what she wants, what she needs. Tell me, Marcus said. She is lonely, Elena explained. The Kithrin are not naturally solitary creatures. They used to live in family groups, but the matriarch is the last adult of her kind. Hunted and attacked until she was the only one left, and she has been alone for centuries, guarding those eggs that she does not even know will hatch. This information changed everything for Marcus, because now he understood the matriarch not just as a mother, but as a survivor, the last of a dying species who had spent hundreds of years fighting alone against enemies who would not stop coming. She does not need us to leave her alone, Marcus realized. She needs us to be there for her. Before he could develop a plan to act on this understanding, fate intervened in a way that changed everything. 2 days later, Marcus was doing his usual peaceful visit to the matriarch's territory when the ground began to shake with activity. Violence he had never felt before. The volcanic mountains that surrounded the crucible had always been active, steaming and rumbling with underground fire. But now they were waking up in a much more dangerous way, and massive cracks split the ground as superheated gases began to pour out from below. Marcus ran toward higher ground and watched in horror as one of these cracks opened directly beneath the matriarch's nest, and toxic yellow smoke began to rise around the eggs that held the future of her entire species. The matriarch appeared from wherever she had been hunting, and her psychic scream hit Marcus not with hostility, but with something far worse, pure, desperate terror for her children. And through the connection they had built over months of patient work, he could feel her panic as clearly as if it was his own. She tried to move the eggs, but they were too large and too delicate, and the gas was spreading faster than she could work, and her massive body could do nothing against an enemy that could not be fought with claws or teeth. Marcus did not think about what he did next. He simply acted. He ran toward the nest, straight into the cloud of toxic gas, straight toward the 30-meter monster who had killed thousands of aliens over the centuries. And the matriarch turned and saw him coming, and for one terrible moment, he thought she would kill him. Her psychic attack hit him harder than it ever had before, flooding his mind with every memory she had of creatures approaching her nest with hostile intent. Every soldier and hunter and colonizer who had tried to take her home and kill her children, And the pain was so intense that Marcus fell to his knees with blood running from his nose, but he did not stop. He crawled forward, pulling a portable atmospheric shield generator from his pack, the last piece of working technology they had, and he activated it around the eggs, creating a bubble of clean air that pushed back the toxic fumes. The matriarch froze, her massive body going completely still as she watched this tiny creature kneel beside her nest and protect the eggs that meant everything to her. For hours they stayed like that, the human kneeling in the dirt with his hand on the shield generator, the monster standing over him with claws that could tear him apart with a single swipe. And neither of them moved as the volcanic activity slowly died down and the cracks sealed themselves when it was finally safe. Marcus deactivated the shield and began to crawl backward, his body exhausted and his mind aching from the psychic assault that had never completely stopped. Expected the matriarch to let him go, to return her attention to her eggs now that the danger had passed. But instead, she did something that made him stop breathing. She lowered her massive head until her face was level with his, and those 6 red eyes looked into his 2 human eyes. And her psychic field touched his mind, not with violence or fear, but with something soft and warm and questioning. "You helped." The feeling seemed to say, "Why did you help?" Marcus placed his hand on her snout, his palm against scales that had deflected plasma fire and survived centuries of warfare. And he let himself feel everything he wanted her to understand. His desire for friendship, his respect for her strength, his hope for a future where humans in Kithran could share this world in peace. "Because that is what friends do," he said out loud, knowing she could not understand his words, but believing she could understand his heart. The matriarch made that rumbling sound again, the one he had heard once before. And Elena would later tell him that in the Kithran language, this sound meant something like acceptance or welcome or the beginning of trust. She did not move away from his hand. And for a long moment they simply stayed together, the tiny human and the massive beast, connected by something that had nothing to do with strength or power or the ability to cause harm. When Marcus finally walked back to the cave that night, the matriarch followed him to the edge of her territory and watched until he was safely inside. And the next morning when he came out, she was waiting for him with another gift of food over the following weeks. Everything changed. The matriarch began approaching the human camp, not to threaten but to visit, and she allowed Elena to scan her eggs and check their health. And she let Tomas set up monitoring equipment near the nest. Without destroying it, she brought them food from her hunts, massive creatures that could feed the team for weeks. And she began to respond to their voices with different sounds that Elena gradually learned to translate. "She has a name," Elena announced one day with tears in her eyes. "Buried in the frequencies of her calls, there is a sound that means herself. And the closest I can translate it is matriarch, the mother who rules, the last queen of her kind." The Vexery drones recorded everything. And across the galaxy, billions of aliens watched in disbelief as the untamable beast, the monster that had killed armies, curled up near the human camp like a faithful guardian, while Marcus sat beside her and told her stories about Earth Emperor Zholvarik, demanded answers from his scientists. How is this possible? What trick are the humans using? But there was no trick, no technology, no weapon or drug or device that could explain what was happening on Arithia 7. There was only patience and respect and the willingness to offer friendship to a creature that everyone else had seen as nothing but an enemy 2 months before the deadline. Marcus sent a message to the Galactic Territorial Council. "We are ready to present our results," the message said. "Prepare the tribunal hall for our arrival." The Emperor read the message and laughed, but his crystal body flickered with colors that suggested he was not as confident as he wanted to appear. And across the galaxy, people began to wonder if the impossible was about to happen. The team retreated to their cave, and Marcus spent the entire night reading through every file they had about Earth's history. Not the history of wars and empires, but the history of something far older and more important. What are you looking for? Elena asked as she watched him scroll through ancient documents on his damaged tablet. I'm looking for how we survived, Marcus replied without looking up. Humans are not the strongest species on Earth, not the fastest, not the ones with the sharpest claws or the deadliest venom. But we are still here while many stronger creatures are gone. He found what he was looking for and turned the tablet so Elena and Tomas could see the images on the screen. Pictures of wolves and dogs sitting side by side, of wild horses and domestic horses, of hawks perched on human arms. 30,000 years ago, our ancestors met wolves, Marcus explained. And wolves were dangerous predators that killed humans and ate their food. And the logical thing to do would have been to hunt them to extinction. But they did not, Elena said. Beginning to understand, they did not, Marcus confirmed. Instead, they found wolves that were less aggressive, wolves that were curious instead of hostile. And they began to share food with them, to let them sleep near the fire, to treat them not as enemies, but as possible friends. Tomas shook his head with doubt on his face. The Kithrin is not a wolf, Ambassador. It is a 30-meter-tall monster with psychic powers that has killed thousands of aliens. Every species that has come to this planet has tried to conquer the Kithron, Marcus replied calmly. The Vexri sent armies, other races sent machines of war, and all of them saw the Kithron as an obstacle to be destroyed. But we are going to see her as something else. As what? Elena asked, as a mother who is afraid, Marcus said. A mother who has been attacked again and again by creatures who want to take her home and threaten her children. And we are going to show her that we are different. The plan Marcus created was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. And when he explained it to his team, they thought he was crazy. But they trusted him enough to try over the following weeks. They established a routine that was designed to show the Kithron that they were not a threat. And every action they took was deliberate and meaningful. First, they stopped carrying weapons outside the cave, leaving their plasma rifles and defensive equipment behind whenever they ventured into the open. And this terrified Tomas, but he did it anyway because Marcus insisted. She can sense hostility, Elena explained after studying the Kithron's psychic abilities. Her powers let her feel the intentions of creatures around her. And if we approach with weapons and fear and a desire to harm, she will know. Second, they began leaving offerings of food at a specific location, halfway between their cave and the crucible. Not as bait for a trap, but as genuine gifts. And they left the food and walked away without waiting or watching. Kithron found these offerings, and at first she destroyed them with suspicion, tearing the food apart and roaring at the sky. But the humans kept leaving more, day after day, always in the same place. Always walking away peacefully, third and most dangerously. Marcus began to approach the Kithron's territory alone. The first time he did this, the Kithron appeared within minutes, her massive form blocking out the sun, her psychic scream slamming into his mind with visions of death and destruction. And every cell in Marcus's body begged him to run. But he did not run. Instead, he sat down on the ground, made himself as small as possible, and waited. The Kithron circled him, her claws tearing up the earth, her 6 eyes fixed on this strange tiny creature that did not flee. And she screamed at him again and again. But Marcus did not move. After an hour she left, and Marcus walked back to the cave with shaking legs and a splitting headache, but he was alive. And that was more than anyone had expected. The Vexri are confused, Homer reported that evening. Their broadcasts are filled with commentators asking what the human is doing. And the Emperor has publicly stated that you are simply prolonging your inevitable death in an amusing way. Let them think that, Marcus said. He repeated this process every day for weeks, sitting in the Kithron's territory without weapons, without aggression, without any attempt to threaten her or her nest. And slowly, very slowly, something began to change. The psychic attacks grew weaker. Not because the Kithran was losing power, but because she was choosing not to hit him as hard. And the time she spent circling him grew shorter before. She lost interest and walked away. Elena studied the recordings they made of these encounters and found something remarkable. Her calls are changing, she announced one evening with excitement in her voice. The frequency she uses when you are present are different from the one she uses when she senses other creatures. And I think she might be trying to communicate. Can you translate it? Marcus asked. Not yet, but I'm working on it. And I believe the psychic field is not just a weapon but a language. A way of sharing complex emotional and sensory information that goes beyond simple sounds across the galaxy. The audience watching the Vexery broadcasts grew larger every day. And what had started as entertainment, watching foolish humans die in an interesting way, had become something else. What is he doing? The aliens asked each other, why does he keep going back? Why has the Kithran not killed him yet? Emperor Jovarik appeared less frequently in public. And when he did, his crystal body flickered with colors that his advisors found troubling. Hints of yellow and green that suggested uncertainty and even worry. The human is wasting time, the Emperor declared. He has less than 4 months remaining, and sitting in the dirt will not tame the beast. This is merely a slower form of failure. But on Arithia 7, Marcus continued his patient work. And the distance between him and the Kithran grew smaller every day. One morning he arrived at his usual spot and found something waiting for him. A large piece of meat from some animal the Kithran had killed. Placed carefully on the ground where he always sat, Marcus looked at the offering and felt tears forming in his eyes. Because this was not the action of a mindless monster. This was a gift, a response to the gifts he had been leaving. A sign that somewhere in that massive armored body was a mind that was watching and thinking and making choices. He sat down next to the meat and waited. And when the Kithran appeared, she did not circle him with hostility, but stood at a distance and watched, her 6 eyes blinking slowly, her psychic field brushing against his mind, not with violence, but with something that felt almost like curiosity. "Hello," Marcus said softly, knowing she could not understand his words, but hoping she could understand his intent. "Thank you for the gift. I know you are scared. I know you have been hurt. But I am not here to hurt you. I am here to be your friend." The Kithran made a sound he had never heard before, a low rumbling that vibrated through the ground. And then she turned and walked back toward the crucible. Not fleeing and not attacking, just walking. And for the first time, Marcus felt like they were making real progress in the cave that night. Tomas and Elena celebrated this small victory, but Marcus sat apart from them, thinking about what came next. 4 months left, he said to himself. We have come so far, but we still have so far to go outside. The Vexery drones continued their silent watch, and the galaxy continued to wonder what the humans were planning. And somewhere in the crucible, a mother monster looked at her eggs and thought about the strange small creature who kept coming back no matter how many times she tried to scare him away. 3 months after Marcus accepted the impossible challenge, a small human ship descended through the clouds of Arithia 7 and landed in a valley surrounded by mountains. That breathed smoke and fire. Marcus stood at the door of the ship and breathed in the air of this new world. And it smelled like flowers and rain and something else underneath. Something wild and dangerous that made the hairs on his neck stand up. "Beautiful planet," said Dr. Elena Vasquez as she stepped out beside him, her scientific equipment already scanning everything around them. Almost too beautiful. Like a trap that looks like paradise. Elena was a xenobiologist, one of the best in human space. And she had spent her entire career studying alien creatures that most people would run away from. And when Marcus had asked her to join this mission, she had said, Yes, before he even finished explaining the danger behind them came Sergeant Tomas Reyes, a man who had once worked as a wildlife ranger in the most dangerous jungles of Earth before becoming a Marine. And his eyes were constantly moving, watching the tree line and the sky and every shadow that might hide a threat. The Vexari have already deployed their observation drones, Tomas reported, pointing at small flying machines that hovered at a distance, their cameras recording everything. They want to watch us die. Let them watch, Marcus said. Let the whole galaxy watch. The team spent their first day setting up a base camp in a natural cave that offered protection from above and had only one entrance that could be defended. And they worked quickly because none of them wanted to be outside when darkness fell us. The sun began to set and painted the sky in colors of orange and red. Elena looked at her scanner and frowned. I'm picking up a large life form moving in our direction, she said, her voice calm but her hands shaking slightly. Very large. About 15 kilometers away and closing fast. Marcus felt his heart beat faster, but he kept his voice steady as he gave orders, making sure everyone was inside the cave with their weapons ready and their emergency beacons activated in case they needed to call for extraction. They waited in silence as the night grew darker, and the only sounds were the wind in the trees and the distant rumble of the volcanic mountains. And then, even those sounds stopped. Everything went quiet, too quiet. And Marcus knew in his gut that something was very wrong. The Kithran announced itself, not with a roar, but with a wave of pure psychic terror that hit Marcus like a hammer to the skull. And suddenly, his mind was filled with images of death and blood and creatures being torn apart. And every instinct in his body screamed at him to run, to flee, to get away from this place as fast as possible. He heard Elena crying out and Tomas cursing and their AI companion, Homer, reporting damage to its systems from the psychic interference. And through the red haze of fear, Marcus forced himself to look at the entrance of the cave. The Kithram was there, blocking out the stars with its massive body. And it was even more terrifying in person than it had been in the hologram. A nightmare made of muscle and scales, and those 6 glowing eyes that seemed to look directly into Marcus's soul. It roared. And the sound was so loud that rocks fell from the ceiling of the cave. And then it attacked. Plasma fire erupted from Tomas's weapon. Bolts of superheated energy that should have burned through steel. But they splashed against the Kithran scales and did nothing, not even leaving a mark. And the beast swung one massive claw and shattered their defensive barriers. Like they were made of glass. Marcus grabbed Elena and pulled her deeper into the cave as the Kithran tore through their equipment, destroying supplies and weapons and everything they had brought with them. And Tomas fired again and again, but nothing could stop the creature then. Something strange happened. The Kithran paused at the narrow part of the cave, the place where the walls came close together. And even though it could have squeezed through or simply torn the rock apart, it stopped and roared one more time before turning and walking away into the darkness. Why did it leave? Elena whispered, her voice shaking. It had us trapped. It could have killed us all. Marcus helped Thomas to his feet, noting the blood running down the sergeant's arm where a piece of flying debris had cut him. And he looked at the destruction around them. Months of preparation destroyed in minutes. I do not know, Marcus admitted. But we need to find out. The next few weeks were hard and dangerous as the team struggled to survive with limited supplies and damaged equipment. But Marcus refused to call for extraction, refused to give up and prove the Vexari right. During this time they observed the Kithran from a distance, using the few working sensors they had left. And slowly they began to notice patterns in its behavior. It always stays within the same territory, Elena reported one morning, pointing at a map she had drawn on the cave wall. The volcanic basin to the north, what the surveys call the Crucible. And it never leaves that area for long before returning. Territorial behavior, Tomas said. Like a predator guarding its hunting grounds. No, Elena replied. And there was excitement in her voice now. "Not hunting grounds. Look at these readings. There is a concentration of heat and biological activity at the center of the crucible that does not match anything else on the planet." Marcus studied the data and felt something click in his mind. A piece of the puzzle falling into place. "It is not just guarding territory," he said slowly. "It is guarding something specific, something important." They planned their expedition carefully, waiting for a time when the Kithrin was on the far side of its territory, and then they moved into the crucible, hiking through landscapes of black rock and steaming vents that smelled like sulfur. What they found at the center made all of them stop and stare in wonder. There was a nest, a massive structure made of woven volcanic rock and some kind of crystalline material. And inside the nest were eggs, 3 of them, each one the size of a small car, their shells glowing faintly with inner heat. "She is a mother," Elena breathed. "The Kithrin is not a monster attacking invaders. She is a mother protecting her children." Marcus walked closer to the nest, careful not to touch anything. And he looked at the eggs that represented the future of a species that everyone had called a mindless beast. "The Vexeri came here with armies and weapons," he said quietly. "Every species that tried to colonize this planet came as conquerors, as threats. And she did what any mother would do. She fought back," Tomas finished. And there was a new tone in his voice, something like respect. The Vexeri drones hovered nearby, recording everything, broadcasting it across the galaxy. And Marcus knew that billions of aliens were watching and waiting for the humans to do what every other species had done. To attack, to try to destroy the beast and take the planet by force. But Marcus was already thinking of a different way. A human way. And he looked at the eggs and then at his team, and he began to smile again. "We are not going to fight her," he announced. "We are going to do something that no one in this galaxy has ever tried before." Elena and Tomas looked at him with confusion, and the drone zoomed closer as if sensing that something important was about to happen. "We are going to make friends," Marcus said. The Grand Tribunal Hall floated in the darkness of space like a jewel made of light and power. And inside its massive chamber stood representatives from 100 different alien species. All of them watching the small human who had dared to come before them with a request that made most of them laugh. Ambassador Marcus Cole was not a large man, and he knew that every alien in this room saw him as weak and unimportant. But he kept his back straight and his eyes forward as he waited for the Emperor to speak. The Vexeri Empire had ruled this sector of the galaxy for 10,000 years, and their Emperor was a being called Jolvarik, a creature made of living crystal that stood 3 meters tall and glowed with colors that shifted based on his mood. And right now those colors were bright purple and orange, which meant he was amused in the most insulting way possible. "So the humans have come to beg," Jolvarik said, and his voice echoed through the hall like thunder rolling across mountains. "They want the planet called Arithia 7, a world rich with minerals and water and everything their little species needs to grow." Marcus did not react to the mockery in the Emperor's voice because he had expected this treatment from the moment. He accepted this mission, and he knew that showing anger would only make things worse. "We do not beg, Emperor," Marcus said in a calm and steady voice. "We petition the Galactic Territorial Council for colonization rights, as is our right under the treaties your own empire helped to write." Up to right. Ripple of surprise moved through the crowd because most species did not speak back to the Vexeri Emperor. But Marcus had learned that showing too much fear would earn even less respect than showing defiance. Sezalovic's crystals flickered with new colors, hints of red mixing with the purple, and he leaned forward on his throne made of solidified starlight. "You're right," he repeated slowly. "You speak of rights when your species has been traveling the stars for less than 300 years, while mine has ruled for 10,000, and you think you can stand before me and demand a planet." "I demand nothing," Marcus replied. I only ask for what the law allows." The Emperor made a sound that might have been a laugh, a harsh ringing noise that hurt Marcus's ears. And all around the chamber other aliens joined in with their own versions of laughter, clicking and hissing, and howling in amusement of the tiny human who thought he could argue with the masters of the galaxy. "Very well," Jolvarak said once the laughter died down. "Let us speak of Arithia 7 and why no species has ever successfully colonized it, including my own mighty empire." He waved one crystalline hand and a hologram appeared in the center of the chamber, showing a beautiful planet covered in green forests and blue oceans and tall mountains that touched the clouds. "Arithia 7 is paradise," the Emperor continued. "It has everything a species could want: clean air and fresh water and soil that grows food with almost no effort. And for 10,000 years, my empire has wanted to claim it." Marcus watched the hologram rotate slowly, showing the planet from every angle, and he wondered what horror was about to be revealed. "But Arithia 7 has a guardian," Jolvarak said, and his voice dropped lower. "A creature we call the Kithran." The hologram changed, and now it showed something that made Marcus's blood run cold despite all his training and preparation. The Kithran was a monster beyond anything Earth had ever produced. A beast that stood 30 meters tall, with 4 massive legs and 2 arms that ended in claws the size of small vehicles. And its body was covered in scales that looked like black metal. And its head was long and filled with teeth that could bite through steel. But the worst part was its eyes. 6 of them arranged in a circle around its skull, and each one glowed with a deep red light that seemed to pulse with intelligence and hatred. "The Kithran has killed every expedition we have ever sent," the Emperor explained with something that might have been respect in his voice. "It has psychic abilities that can freeze a warrior in place with pure terror, and its body can heal from any wound in minutes. And it is strong enough to tear apart our heaviest war machines like they were made of paper." Marcus studied the creature carefully, noting every detail, every movement in the recording that played within the hologram. 17 species have tried to colonize Arithia 7, Jolvarak continued. "All of them have failed, and most of them lost everyone they sent. And even my own forces were forced to retreat after losing an entire legion of our best soldiers." The Emperor stood from his throne and walked down the steps toward Marcus, his crystal body ringing with each step like bells made of ice. And when he stopped, he towered over the human ambassador like a glowing mountain. "You want this planet, human?" "Yes," Marcus said without hesitation. "Then earn it," the Emperor declared, and his voice boomed through the chamber so every being could hear. "Tame the Kithran, tame that beast, and the planet is yours." Silence fell over the hall as everyone understood what had just happened, and Marcus could feel the weight of 100 stares pressing down on him, all of them waiting for him to break, to beg, to admit that this was impossible. The Vexery Emperor looked down at Marcus with colors swirling through his body that showed pure contempt, and he leaned close enough that Marcus could feel the cold radiating from his crystal form. "What do you say, little human?" Jolvarak whispered, though somehow everyone in the chamber could still hear him. "Will you accept this challenge, or will you crawl back to your tiny corner of the galaxy and accept that there are things beyond your species?" Marcus thought about Earth and all the humans who were counting on him, the colonies that were running out of room, the children who needed a future. And he thought about all the times in human history when someone had said that something was impossible and humans had done it anyway. He looked up at the Emperor, and he looked at the hologram of the terrible beast, and he felt something rising in his chest that was not fear but something else entirely. It was the same feeling his ancestors had felt when they first looked at wolves and saw not just danger but possibility. The same feeling that had driven humans to ride horses and train hawks and turn the deadliest creatures of Earth into partners and friends, Marcus Cole smiled. And it was not a nervous smile or a fake smile, but a real one. The smile of a man who knew something that no one else in this room could understand. "We accept," he said. The Emperor pulled back in surprise, because this was not the reaction he had expected. And for just a moment, his crystal body flickered with colors that might have been confusion or even concern. "You accept," Jovarek repeated. "We accept your challenge," Marcus confirmed. Still smiling. "Give us 1 year on Arethea 7, and we will do what your empire could not do in 10,000 years. The chamber erupted in noise as aliens shouted and argued, and laughed even harder than before. And the Emperor returned to his throne with movements that seemed less confident than before. 1 year, Jovarek agreed. "And when you fail, when the Kithrin tears your people apart, the whole galaxy will watch and remember that humans are nothing but foolish children playing at being a real species." Marcus bowed his head slightly in acknowledgement. But he never stopped smiling, and as he turned to leave the chamber, he could feel the eyes of every being following him, wondering what madness had taken hold of this strange small creature from a young and insignificant world. None of them understood why he was smiling, and that was exactly what Marcus was counting on.